Welcome to the Tech Pathfinder podcast, where we explore the impact of technology on the people in your workplace. Hello and welcome to the Tech Pathfinder podcast, where we explore the impact of technology on the people in your workplace. I'm your host, JP, and I help businesses get the most out of their technology through the engagement and support of their people. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing how relevant gamification is to the workplace and workplace technology and how we can engage our people better. If you jump into a time machine and take yourself back to about 2016, gamification was the buzzword then that AI seemingly is today. The chat back then was that gamification and gamifying the learning and goal process within the workplace could shortcut our employees' brains to get the most out of them through being more engaging and entertaining. Fast forward to now, and gamification still has relevance in the workplace. Today, gamification is seen as more than just a flash in the pan solution to fix training and engagement, but a tool used to help reach and engage new generations of digital-first workforce, and also a way to reach and support neurodiverse employees. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking with Viren Thakrar from In the Game about the relevance of gamification in the workplace through engagement and culture, and how using gamification can create energy and buzz in your company culture. Viren is the co-founder of In the Game, where he works with organizations to build highly energized teams that focus on innovation, growth, and impact in ways that are fun, fresh, and engaging. He's passionate about all things culture, facilitation, psychology, teams, gamification, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And outside of this, he loves video games, and I can join him on that, board games, listening to and DJing a little bit of house music, running and watching the soccer. Viren, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, JP. Really excited about this topic.
Yeah, it's something that I think when you and I spoke about it originally, it's right. It was in 2016, or that's a rough guess, but it was the buzzword. All of the conferences, all of the talks were about, how all of the tech companies were trying to show how their work system was gamified and how it works. But it's great to see that this still has some relevance, and really keen to talk to you a little bit more about that today.
Yeah.
Before we do, though, it'd be great to get a little bit more info about yourself, your background, and your company In the Game.
Yeah, great. I was going to say, isn't it funny as well that you'll be well across the Gartner hype cycle, and there's these things that are hyped out and then it kind of flattens out. We see how things play out. I think it's going to be very interesting to see the same for AI, as we've done for now gamification, where it's ended up. But sorry, I'll get back to the question. bit about myself. So obviously, Viren, co-founder of In the Game, and we started In the Game. It's just over 5 years ago now. So my background's basically come from the world of psychology. I started off studying sports psychology, ended up moving to New Zealand, looking for work, couldn't find work in the sports psychology realm. It was because it was time for a bit of a pivot, so I ended up in the kind of org psych, business psychology realm. And that's where I've been then for the rest of my professional career. But I still find the perspective of looking at things from the sports psychology world has actually helped me look at things a little bit differently from an org psych perspective. So it's kind of completed my kind of education, got into the professional space. A lot of it started around psychometrics, using psychometric tools, and then moving into more broader roles, looking at kind of career development, selection, leadership development, culture development. And my last role before starting In the Game was in a kind of corporate innovation role. But I'd always wanted to start my own business, and then I kind of decided to take the leap and start In the Game.
Yeah, so you mentioned that psychology background, and I think there's obviously a lot of psychology behind gamification and sort of why it works and how it works. Can you give us a little bit of an explanation as to, I guess, the psychology behind its application in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think its most basic gamification is around using game-like elements in a non-game context. So a simple example, I've got young kids, and as anyone with young kids will know, getting them to do anything that you want them to do sometimes can be quite hard. So a simple way of gamifying that might be how you'll get 2 points. The first person to get changed will get 2 points. The other person will get 1 point. And so you've got these simple game elements, points, competition, the social dynamic. And you'll see when you do something like that, kids respond really, really well to it. But actually, that sense, the drivers that gamification ties into, applies very well to adults as well. So we're still motivated by, feeling a sense of achievement, feeling, hitting those achievements, hitting those goals. We are motivated by a certain level of competition. All these things will vary from individual to individual. We're motivated by the feedback loops that games provide. We're motivated by connecting and sharing experiences with others. So all those things that work when we were kids playing games and how we use games for kids very much apply to us as adults as well.
It's chasing that dopamine hit, isn't it? That
Is,
little
yeah.
bit of good feeling of, oh yes, I've done it, I've achieved it.
That felt good. Yeah, it is. And I think this is where, going back to your earlier point around when gamification first came around, I think it was very much focused on that dopamine hit side of gamification. You just give people points for everything, you put them on a leaderboard. And I think the key evolution here is actually gamification is much deeper than that. There's a much more nuance to it. It's not just about the surface level elements. And I think that's where gamification has evolved a lot. It has some of those surface level elements, but it's also got a lot of the deeper elements as well.
Yeah, that's kind of leads into my next question around, I guess, the evolution of that perception of what gamification is. Because as I said, in 2016, 2015, it was the top of the hype cycle. And when tech companies were looking at ways to show that they were gamifying things, and in reality, it was just a presentation of a table to show that, oh, here's a leaderboard, or here's a way to kind of drive, and it was a very sort of early attempt at gamification. It wasn't sort of going into those next layers. So how is that, I guess, the perception of gamification over the last 10 years? What's the key reason, do you think, that it's still relevant today and beyond that sort of leaderboard approach?
Yeah, look, my simple answer is I think you look at all the statistics around workplace engagement and people are disengaged and they're bored. Like a lot of stuff people do, there's not a lot of excitement to it. There's not a lot of novelty to it. And you find that is going to be contributing to the disengagement people feel. You're bouncing around from one Zoom call to the next, one team call to the next. It's all the same. And I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think gamification sits in here. It's not only gamification, to create more meaningful, unique experiences that have higher degrees of novelty, but also help us get to a better outcome in those situations as well. So I think that's where there's still so much exciting potential for gamification. It's really shaking up. How do we look at the world of work now, and how do we bring all these other excellent elements into it to create a better, more engaging place to work?
So I'd like to know, I guess, a practical application and how you're using it within the game. Obviously, you've got the app itself, excuse me, the app itself, but you're also leveraging gamification in the workshops that you and your team run.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of a way that you're using gamification to drive that engagement and culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So our approach basically has been to use, it's almost like creating like a digital board game type environment. So let's say, for example, you've just completed an engagement survey process with the organization and you're rolling out the action planning with teams. And so that's one area where we've thought, okay, look, that's usually quite dry. Teams will get around PowerPoint, they'll see the results, they'll have a discussion. And because it's quite dry, it's not normally super exciting. You don't necessarily get great ideas at the end for improving culture, and the whole thing just peters out. So we're like, okay, this is a good opportunity to bring some energy to this, and we decided to kind of gamify that conversation. And what we've essentially done is a simple process where a host will bring people together. They'll input the survey results onto the platform. People will join the session, and as soon as they join, there's a whole bunch of game-like elements immediately. So one of the things people either remember fondly or not so fondly is when you're playing Monopoly, you're picking your tokens, and everyone gets attached to the token. Everyone wants the hat or the dog or the car. Someone's got a token they love. So when you join the in-the-game experience, people will pick an avatar and they'll customize the avatar. So there's these little game-like elements, and immediately it's different to your standard workshop. You're not just coming in and your standard names coming on the team screen. You're coming in, you're picking an icon, and you're answering a kind of light-hearted question. And then from there, you're kind of into like a bit of a gamified experience where you're moving around a board, you're getting points for responses. Questions are actually drawn at random. So there's no one sitting here going through this script almost of questions that we need to ask at the engagement planning part of the process. There's a bit of randomness in there. And I find that randomness, sparks different ways of thinking. We don't know what's kind of going to come up, and I think that all makes things a little bit more exciting for people.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of people try to change the way that they create their, I guess, their learning journey, for example,
Yeah,
and leverage. I saw a really interesting video around this woman who was trying to. I think it was something like she was learning how to blow glass. So she wanted to develop that skill, and rather than sort of have a list of things like I need to do A, then B, then C, and go through it, she'd set it up very much like a skills tree in a video game.
yeah,
So where to be able to, you want to become like a top level warrior. To do that, you need to learn how to use a sword. You need how to learn to defend. You need to learn these skills. So she'd gone through and figured out, well, this is like to be able to be at a sort of this level glass blower, I need to do these steps. First step, I need to create this, and she'd taken it that next step further by giving herself rewards at the end of certain aspects of the tree. So once I've learnt these 5 skills, then I get to, buy myself a new piece of equipment or tool to get to the next one. And I think her end goal was she'll go to Italy to see like the traditional artisans, doing it in person. So she'd kind of set up this. Taken this task of I want to learn a new skill, and she's gamified herself
yeah,
and using it as a way to help with motivation and engagement. And it's not, I don't think it's necessarily like creating a tech tree, and a skills tree is going to work for everyone, but aspects of that I think everyone can relate to. It'd be nice to sort of, even if you take the aspect of having a reward at the end of achieving a certain number of tasks, rewarding yourself and leveling up almost.
yeah,
That sort of application of it in sort of productivity circles and your day to day, training and development. You're applying that to a workplace setting where you can start to. It switches it. It lifts it from being just another workshop, as you said, to something that's, oh, cool. Well, I'm the little mushroom icon, or the little car icon. That's me. Instead of, you've been on a Miro board and you see my name flying around, but having something there's a little bit of meaning behind it, and that drives that engagement. And it's only a small thing, but those small steps add up.
Absolutely. It doesn't need to be this big, huge thing. As I said with the earlier example of the kids, it's just a simple, hey, we've got this behavior we want to do. Let's give attribute some points. So that's it. Doesn't have to be a complicated place to start. And I like that example about leveling up and looking at gamification as a way of increasing our own meaning and satisfaction with our own kind of growth journey. And you mentioned at the beginning of my bio, I'd taken up running, and Strava does the gamification aspect. Like, it's amazing how well it's baked into the product. It doesn't really matter where you're starting. I was very not starting as a fast runner at all, but I always felt this sense of I was leveling up and improving. They've just managed to find little ways to reward every training run, and it's super. And then you've got the social aspect as well, which is a big part of gamification. Where people are kind of giving each other kudos and likes, and it's such a well integrated product when we think about gamification and personal development. It's a terrific example.
Yeah. And you think of gamification it's something that's really common within consumer technology. So stepping outside of work tech, you use Strava as an example. Even just Audible gives you badges for achieving certain things, so it makes you feel good about it. Even so, I use a hosting platform for the podcast itself. And as you achieve certain number of listeners or certain number of downloads, it gives you a badge for it.
Yeah.
And it just, it's little things that just kind of give you that, that little push, that little step to go, to acknowledge your success and to move forward, rather than, something that's super obvious and super big. And it's interesting, once you start looking out for gamification within the apps and the things that you do, it's everywhere.
It's absolutely everywhere. And one of the trends I'm noticing more, and I quite like it, is these little details that are because I think incorporating and bringing in like lighter play-based elements into what we're doing is in that gamification sphere. And so is it Slack? You get to the end of your Slack feed and there's this little emoji, and I can't remember what the exact emoji is, but you've read all your messages. Oh, well done, you finished all your messages. And it's like, it's these little details. Again, they're not big things. They just add to the playfulness of using the product, and it just makes it a more pleasurable experience. And it's you see it once you kind of keep an eye out for it, you'll see it absolutely everywhere.
So, thinking of I guess the workplace of today, there's a lot of talk about how to engage the younger generations coming into the workforce. They're very much digital first. So technically, as a generation, I'm a millennial, but because of when I was born, I'm a geriatric millennial, which effectively means that I grew up with analog technology, but I evolved with digital technology. So
Snap.
I'm the last of the generation. Yeah, yeah, we're the last of the generation that knows how to use the dial telephones and things like that. So, but we're coming into a workforce, and it's quite interesting because we've got a workforce that has 5 generations in one group. So I'm interested to understand how gamification is really important for reaching those younger generations, but also I guess your take on its relevance for the older generations that may not necessarily have a digital first upbringing.
Yeah, look, great question. I think on the latter question, so in terms of how we use gamification, we're looking at it's probably more of um, a lighter touch approach to using gamification. There's no real time you're not like things are whizzing around the screen and you're kind of trying to like do all of those things. And we find what the gamification that we use does, it's kind of brings in some freshness, brings in some novelty, but it's pretty accessible to all people. We haven't had anyone kind of feel put off by it. And actually, my litmus test for it is my wife's not a big board gamer. I shouldn't really commit that to audio. She's not a big board gamer, so she's my first test to basically, if I kind of we're building up the product, I'll try it with her first. And if her reaction is, oh, this is cool, and it's not, oh, take this away from me, I know it's on the right path to basically including people that don't like game type aspects, because it's not everyone. So I think, again, it's easy to get carried away with these things and think, oh, everyone's going to love it. Some people really don't like, games. You've got to be really careful around things like competition. Like, it's always about what's the objective of what we're building and how does competition facilitate that, because it doesn't always. And so, with our games, we've been very mindful of very light competition. It's the lightest competition, like way of implementing competition that there is, because we're very mindful. A lot of our products are around collaboration, bringing the team together. It's not around competition that creates any kind of friction. It should be competition that enhances the conversation. So I think from the aspect of making it sure that it doesn't put off a multi-generational workforce, I think it's really important if you're designing any game type applications, is just think about the workforce, think about their preferences, think about how much you're leaning into the different concepts of gamification. So I think then in terms of the initial question that was around engaging the more digital first and how gamification works with that particular group.
Yeah.
So I think, as we mentioned, a lot of the products people are using, they've got gamification inherently built into them. So I think the digital first workforce are used to having these types of things in there to stimulate them, to keep them interesting. So I think when you take that away, it can seem more boring. If you contrast what the consumer tech they're using day in, day out, and they come in, if they're using workplace technology, which has every aspect of that pulled out of it, and it's just devoid of any fun or engagement. There's a very sharp contrast, I think, for digital first people between consumer tech and tech they use in the workplace. And if there is that mismatch, it's very noticeable to them. Well, because we're used to it. You go back to, I remember what overhead projector things are. There's little acetate slides. So the contrast for us is, I think, less jarring when we're in environments where it's not, the technology is not so gamified or engaging or nice to use. But I think if you've grown up with technology, it's much more jarring if the product doesn't have all these elements that you're used to having. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. It's almost like you're silly to not include that level of gamification, because then you're not tapping into the way that they expect the world to work.
That's right.
And the technology to work. You mentioned an interesting thing around the competition there, and I think that's really where early attempts at, or sort of half-hearted attempts at gamification fell down, is it created unnecessary competition by creating a leaderboard. And it was, it was then something that I think works in some cohorts and it works in
Yeah,
some industries and even some roles better than others. Probably like a sales role,
yeah,
they've been using leaderboards for since the dawn of time.
that's right.
But
Yeah,
but if you were to sort of start putting leaderboards on, um, say, help desk tickets or something like that, where you've got to be careful that your leaderboard isn't shifting the focus and encouraging the wrong behaviors, because
absolutely.
that's, as someone who's worked with sales leadership around creating, even creating commission structures and incentive structures. you Every single time you create one, there's an unintended consequence that you don't necessarily think of. That I want the team to have more of a focus on services, so we'll reward that, and that ends up meaning they front load the deals, and your contracts don't look as good over the term life of the contract itself. So
Yeah,
you change it again, and then the services drop off because they're focused on the length of the contract. So you're getting 4, 5, 6 year contracts, and then you've got issues down the line that you're creating for yourself. So you change it again, and so those unintended consequences of having a leaderboard creates that, I guess, that competition in a negative way.
yeah.
So you've got to be really careful as to how you apply it to the specific scenario that you're trying to address.
Absolutely. I think that's the key. That phrase, the unintended consequences, is really watching out for that, because as soon as you start strongly incentivizing one type of behavior, there's ramifications to that.
Mm,
And even from a leaderboard perspective, it's just even interesting design decisions like how much do you show the entire leaderboard? So how much do you show people that are maybe at the bottom versus just highlighting those people at the top? Because anyone that's been the bottom of a table or a leaderboard knows it's not a great feeling. And do you want that publicized everywhere? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you want to come to work and do your best work?
mm,
For some people, it might trigger them to go, I want to get off the bottom. But for most people, it's not going to be a great place to be. So it's every aspect of thinking through all those consequences and thinking okay, it's great. People might feel great if they're at the top, but there's only one person at the top. What about everyone else? How are they going to feel as part of this process? And um, yeah, they're all interesting things to consider from a design perspective when
mm.
implementing gamification.
We see a big shift within the workplace now. I've certainly noticed it, and I think it's because of my own journey with neurodiversity and understanding how my mind works and how it might not be, the textbook way that people expect minds to work. So, and I think it's a part of the stigma is now gone for things like ADHD and other neurodiverse mindsets and the way people work. Really,
Mm.
um, I think I'd be interested in your take on how gamification really supports those individuals who might not necessarily click and adhere to older styles of workshopping and engagement.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a great question. And I think for me, it comes down to providing more options than just one option. So I think
Yeah.
I look at gamification as part of a suite of things you might do to engage your workforce more broadly. Now, the unfortunate thing is we just go to the default. We go to the PowerPoint slide, everyone get into a room and let's have a brainstorming. And it's just like, well, let's just shout out ideas at one another. And it doesn't work because it's a small fraction of people that works for, and the rest of the people it doesn't. And I think
Mm,
something like gamification, what it does is it brings in a different modality. Now, when going back to our platform, one of the things we do is there's mixed ways people can contribute. So people can, some questions will be in writing, some questions will be verbal. People always have the option to pass if they don't want to answer. And so what we find with that is it just includes more people in the conversation. It's one of my
mm,
favorite piece of feedback whenever we run something. It almost always will get someone comes up to us at the end and goes, hey, I really appreciate the fact that I'm normally I find I get anxious when I get put on the spot. I'm a little bit more introverted, whatever the person's preferences and tendencies are. And they feel like, well, the fact that I just got opportunities to contribute in different ways was really, I really value that, because normally that's not the case. And so it helps lots of people shine, and it plays to lots of
mm,
different people's strengths. I don't think gamification is the only thing, but I think it's like, how do we build different techniques to engage different types of people, because not everyone's the same. And cognitive diversity is absolutely essential to innovation. So if we really want to unlock innovation and growth, we want to be catering to our diverse pool of people that work for us.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Is there is no silver bullet. There is no one
No.
way to do things for, I mean, really anything these days. But engagement is certainly one where whether it's based on someone's cognitive state, whether it's based on their generation, their age, their gender, their background, all of those things mean that you're never going to have a room full of one person. You're going to have a room full of a variety of people with different ways of working and different operating. So if you can provide a variety of ways for them to latch onto the ship and move forward, then you're going to be better off. Whether
Yeah.
that's through workshopping and culture and engagement, whether that's just through holding a meeting. Like having a meeting structure is really important, but if you're not considering the people in that meeting and how you run that, I had a really good chat with Beata in one of the earlier episodes around that, around how taking the steps to actually understand the people in the room and what they're trying to get out of it makes a difference to the success of and the outcomes of a meeting. Being conscious of the diversity in the room is just as important as having diversity in the room in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, like putting yourself in. I always try exercises. What if someone was totally opposite of me? How would they look at this experience and this workshop? And uh, a little mantra I kind of follow is design experiences for introverts, and you'll design experiences that are better all round. Because I think often we're defaulting to loud extroverted people will be happy to contribute. It's generally a little bit easier to get. You have the opposite challenge of keeping the conversations maybe focused, but if you're designing experiences for making sure that you're including more introverted people, inevitably the extroverted people are going to contribute anyway, and then you're also including the more introverted people as well. So I think trying to force yourself, if you're kind of going, hey, how do I, in this upcoming meeting, this workshop, I need to engage people, try and put yourself in lots of different shoes. And the first shoe I kind of go is, what if someone was the total opposite of me? How would they find this experience?
You mentioned you taking anything you're going to run in the workshop and running it past your wife who's not focused on the gaming side. I think that's I saw a similar example in software development where there was a product owner who would, to make sure that the user experience was seamless and easy to follow, he would take the mock-ups home and to his mum and who has very poor digital literacy, to then say, like, if she can navigate it, then I know that I'm catering to, and then using that as a way to kind of understand, well, how do I make sure that I'm catering to lowest common denominator is the wrong term, but the least applicable use case for that particular scenario,
Yeah.
to make sure that, well, it's definitely, I know it's going to work for the people who think like me and who are very tech savvy, but what about the people who don't use computers that much? How are they going to navigate it? Because then if I can solve for that, then it's going to be better for everyone.
Yeah, I think so. I think that those kind of, and I think this is where with gamification, especially the way we approach it, is test it with people that don't like games, because the people that like games
Yeah,
will immediately, they'll just get into it. They like
yeah,
all the stuff with games. They're just and they're delighted. They see something that's part of their hobby in a work context. They're usually pretty stoked. But it's actually find the people that don't like games, and that's where I think that's there've been some of the more pleasing moments in our journey of building games. Is like I've been like going in, I've got a game, I'm not sure this is the audience for it, and you do it and it works, because I think ultimately what you uncover is everyone kind of everyone is actually fed up with the boring way of doing things. So people do, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can make these assumptions that someone is in this demographic and so they probably won't like games, and all of a sudden you're playing a light game and everyone's getting into it, and you're like, okay, it's fundamentally we all do like enjoying ourselves. We all like having some level of fun. For some of us, it's more important than others. So I think it's that they're quite interesting test cases. Test it with people who you think, okay, these people might not like it so much, or this cohort might not like it so much, and test your assumptions, because in some cases you'll be right, in some cases you'll be very wrong as well. Yeah.
So that leads in, I guess, to a practical application of how do I bring it into my organization? How do I start applying gamification to my workshops, to the way I engage my people? What are the steps that I need to consider? Obviously, that sort of test cases are really important, but what else do I need to consider?
So I think from a people and culture perspective, my normal approach is look at the employee experience lifecycle and identify one part that you want to kind of pilot an experiment with. So
Mm,
for some people, that might be looking at gamification in the recruitment stage, might be onboarding, it might be in the learning and development side. It might be for culture building, that's the part we're in. It might be even just looking at one of those places, and then thinking a little bit about how you might go to gamify it. So you've got a couple of different options. You can go really lo-fi and light and do something yourself, and that's often a great place to start. It's okay. Let's
mm,
test out some game principles in the next workshop I'm running, or let's test out some game principles in the next onboarding sequence we're doing. So doing things yourself, that's absolutely, it's a great place to start experimentation. Keep it low cost, test it out, learn a bit about your own employees, what they respond to, and kind of iterate from there. The other is then obviously looking at gamified software that's out there, and there is gamified software for every aspect of the employee lifecycle. One
mm,
I'm a really big fan of in the learning space is a platform called EdApp. It's you can literally take your existing content, go onto EdApp. Within an hour, you'll have a lightly gamified micro learning experience. And so once you've maybe done some little tests, you can do something a little bit more, spend a little bit more time, build something
mm.
out, and again see how it goes and see how it resonates. But overall, I think the best approach is take one aspect of the employee lifecycle journey, play around, experiment a little bit, try different things out, and then there are off the shelf things that you can plug in. Once you're kind of happy with the direction you're going, once you kind of got a sense that this does work with our audience.
So where do you think we're going into the future if we sort of pull out the crystal ball and look
Yeah.
into, we've talked about 10 years ago, let's sort of go 10 years forward. I guess what role do you think gamification is going to play in the workplace? And I guess, is there any emerging trends or innovations that you're seeing within that space that's going to happen pretty soon?
Yeah, so I still think there's still tons of opportunity just even at the fundamental level. So I think it's still adoption's not massive. So I think there's still room for most organizations to explore if it's right for them how gamification fits in. So I think even at the current state, we went through the hype cycle. It's kind of dipped down now, and I think there's still lots of room for organizations to apply gamification principles to the things they do. So I think then in terms of the future, look, you can't talk about the future without talking about AI. And I think, where the role AI might play in, where we're looking for our tool, for example, is at the moment, I write all the questions that go into the platform. There's definitely a world where those questions are generated based on what the group is talking about. So you're getting more of
Mm.
a live dynamic set of questions rather than the static set of questions, and so they get so there's opportunities there of bringing that type of technology in. I think the technologies I get excited about, but I'm still not convinced that they're going to get mainstream adoption. Things like VR. I've got a VR headset, PSVR2. I absolutely love the level of immersion it creates and the type of experiences you can create. I just had again, if I use my wife as an example, she'll wear the VR headset 10 minutes, go, that's a cool experience, and that's enough.
Yeah.
And I just don't see how it's going to bridge this gap of people that love playing with this type of technology versus people that just have not that much interest outside of maybe one unique experience they might do. So it's a technology.
Yeah, VR is a real interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because again, something that was had a flash in the pan. Let's
Mm,
call it 2017. It was the hype of I guess much more immersive training, and the obvious application would be like a train driver or a plant operator or something where you want them to be able to go in, learn, make mistakes, but sort of evolve that skill in a very safe environment. But yeah, it's interesting to understand, well, where is that going to actually apply to knowledge work, or where is that going to apply to, you know, I used the sales example before, and I think that's you can see where maybe you could use it to help build out, AI generated conversations and discussions where you're trying to practice, closing techniques or practice
mm.
discovery techniques where the AI is sort of inputting the questions, and but that doesn't work for everyone because you do that in a physical sense where you sit and you might do role playing in and you either enjoy role playing in sales training, or you hate it with a passion.
Yeah.
And it's sort of it's back and forth. So you'll have the same thing with VR in that sense as well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know where that goes over the next few years as the technology becomes less jarring, because you've used the earlier ones, though, motion sickness was a guarantee, but in an actual gaming sense, like I've used them for racing simulators, and it's great. Like it just opens up your perception and the immersion of the actual playing experience as well. But then you go the next level. I think, was it Ready Player One? Was that movie where everyone it was basically no one really lived in the real world. Everyone lived in this elevated digital world. But in that they had haptic suits that they could feel when things hit them, or sort of, so they were even more immersive. They could walk on the spot and it would make them move. So it wasn't just sitting there with a VR headset and a controller or a keyboard and mouse. It was almost elevating them into that digital world in a complete physical sense. And I think that's where those shifts need to be, for it to be, I think, more inclusive for everyone to get engaged, for it to just level up that next piece.
It is going to be a really interesting one to see, because I think it's amazing when you do see it applied well. It's incredible, as you say. Those environments where you can train in a simulated environment because the real environment's too dangerous. Fire, it might be dealing with an emergency. It's amazing to be able to get that level of immersion and realism, and without being in that real scenario. I just think it's the mass adoption piece that I kind of go, okay, is it going to break beyond that? I love AR as a workplace technology. I think that's, again, it's just the things like the HoloLens. You just look at the applications and go, this is incredible. Will it bridge that specialist domain to the more generalist domain for learning and workplace culture? I'm not sure.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. I hope, because I just think they've just got amazing applications, these technologies. And then I think, when you look at gamification, again, you're bringing it in a completely different way, using a completely different mode and a completely different medium.
So I'm really excited for where it's heading. It's making me want to go and play video games now. Sort of shortcut straight to the dopamine hit. But look, Viren, really great to talk to you. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with myself and the listeners.
Thanks so much, JP. Great conversation. Loved it. Loved all the questions as well. That was super.
Excellent. All right, you take care. Cheers.
You too, take care. See ya.
This episode was brought to you by In The Game. In The Game's platform enables you to run gamification-powered team conversations that immediately improve your culture. Sessions take less than 3 minutes to set up, and you walk away from every session with tangible ideas and actions to improve engagement. A fresh, not fluffy approach to culture. For more information, visit inthegame.com.au. Thank you to In The Game for supporting this podcast.